Hello, my name is Charlene DeChico. It is with sincere passion that I am eager to learn about people, culture, true history, and the overall human experience. Join with me as I embark on this journey. This is your Community Spotlight.
Presentation at 1:30. First, we have food. And first, before I should have even done that, I should tell you who I am. I'm Alicia Hall-Deacon. My parents are Penn and Tammy Hall. I'm from Parshall. I'm the superintendent at Knife River Indian Villages National Historic Site. So it is really great to be here and see all of you here and just appreciate your time today. And before we eat, we asked Harry if he will do a prayer for us. If you guys stand.
Yeah. Any water busters here? Paragzitska. Prairie chickens. Water busters are my grandparents. So excuse me. And prairie chickens are my grandparents. The reason I trained this, I want you to understand who I am and what I'm doing. These days, there's very few of us that still speak our language and still remember some of those old things. So I'm not the most fluent person around, and I'm not the one that knows everything, that's for sure. I'm still learning, as old as I am. So if I make a mistake, please excuse me. I'm just trying to do what I can for my little auntie here. Okay. Tade wakawaki aruiga is a hero. Aruikirusi is a Mickey Maduishka is a Isha is a Tabo Makakuski is a hero. Hiri Arui as a Aka is a Zikis. Doctor Mala is a Mabe. Hiro Hiri Ma as a doctor and is a I really get child is that Dante is a Mabe doctor Mala is a Hiroka Maroshi is an Okiko as it is Checo Marel is a Arimiko Star is a Dante Wakia. You know, Mara D. Needy head is a kick shot is a Dante. Here she is a week kick shot is a week. Yeah. I show up. A sheet is an over there is a Marshall is a our Heavenly Father, please look at us here. Please help what the presenters are going to teach us today and let them know that what they're doing is trying to help us, and let us listen with both ears and take it into our heart so that we can use it and be of value to us. Bless this food so that we can have some good things. Where there's bad things, let us stay away from that. Where there's good things, take us that way and fix that road for us so that we're easy to go on. Make the good things happen to these people as they go home today. And that they get home safe and sound wherever they're at. I ask these things, great Heavenly Father. Yeah, oh, it's
First, I just wanted to talk about this document. And this is something that we've been working on for a few years, and a few of you were at the beginning with us when we started talking about it and really envisioning what this document is going to look like. And this is a government document, but it is much more than that. It is written from the perspective of the Mandan Hidatsa viewpoint, which isn't something that you see ever in government documents. So this is something that is just very special and close to our heart, and I want to thank the people that are involved in this. And if you guys can stand up, I think that would be great. You're going to be seeing them, they're going to be talking, but the folks that have been doing a lot of the work, please stand up. We have Brenda, and Mike, and Kate, and Marla, she's not gonna stand. And then also I have my wonderful staff here. We have Angela, Emily, and Darian. If you guys come to the park, these people will be greeting you. And if you do gardens or any want to talk about it, Darian is the person, like he can get anything to grow, seriously. So, but this cultural landscape report is something that is just, when they handed it to me yesterday, I couldn't let it go. I was very excited about it. This isn't something that is open to the general public because it has sensitive material that we are keeping safe, that was within the landscape of the national park. But we do have a story map that is going to be put out. It's a website that has a lot of this information that excludes the sensitive information. That is still being worked on, and they'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just wanted you to know that is coming soon. And so if you are hoping to read the document right away, not something that we can do, but we are getting that information out. And then also if you are interested, please email me, and I can get you,
Also, we're passing around sign-in sheets, and
Yes.
if people put their emails on that, we'll send you an email, let you know, give you a link to it when it's out and ready.
Okay, so Brenda said that we have a sign-in sheet that we're passing around, and if you're interested in the updates, please put your email on there, and we will send those updates about the story maps and the cultural landscape report. And if you guys are wanting to go for a drive from here, it's 2.5 hours either way around the lake to Knife River Indian Villages. Come and see me, and we can talk about it too, and get a nice tour of the park. But this document and working on it is something that is really special. Being able to work at Knife River is something that's really special. To live and work in our ancestral homeland is something that I hope that all of you at some point get to do. At least come down and visit. And just very excited to share the information that we found. And so I'm going to hand it over to Kate, who will start going through the presentation. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Ricketson. I'm a landscape architect with Quinn Evans, and I'm based in Westport, Massachusetts, which is traditional Cohasset Wampanoag land. I completed my master's in landscape architecture at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I've learned about historic preservation through my work with Quinn Evans, focused on cultural landscapes. And introducing myself in this way, sharing the place I belong to, and a little bit of the background from my academic perspective is something I'm doing directly in response to what I've learned from our MHA collaborators on this project. They've told us how important it is to properly introduce yourself to people so that they can place you in their conceptualization of the world, who your people are, the perspectives and traditions you were raised with. It's a point of connection, and it's also a way of acknowledging your biases. I'd also like to take a brief moment to acknowledge some of the many voices that have contributed to the creation of this report. So within Quinn Evans, my co-presenter, and landscape architect Brenda Williams, and historian Ruth Bills, who's not with us today. From the National Park Service, Marla McEnany and Alicia Deegan, ethnobotanist Linda Black Elk, historian Mike Bartholomew, and those members of the tribal community who have granted us oral histories, many of whom are actually here today. So Harry, Mary, and Martha, it's nice to see you all. Thank you so much. As early learners of Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara history and culture, we are indebted to all mentioned and many more for their patience and willingness to guide us in the document. Cultural knowledge and stories support the archaeological record of human presence in the northern Great Plains area as early as 12,000 years ago. The contemporary people whose ancestors lived in what we now call the Knife River Indian Villages are known as the three affiliated tribes of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. While recognized jointly, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara peoples have distinct cultural identities and traditions. One important shared custom between the three tribes is the construction of earth lodge villages as traditional dwellings. The primary features that define the Knife River Indian Villages National Historic Site are the remnants of 3 earth lodge villages, which were the summer homes of Hidatsa and Mandan people for roughly 250 years. The villages have had multiple names through the course of history, but for clarity, I'll use the ones that National Park Service uses today, which are Hidatsa Village, north of the Knife River, Owatiha Village, directly on the western bank of the Knife River, and Owatiha, located between Owatiha Village and the Visitor Center. The 3 villages were constructed by Hidatsa peoples, but were occupied by members of both Hidatsa and Mandan tribes at certain times in history. In working with representatives from the 3 affiliated tribes, the Quinn Evans team learned a couple of important concepts that helped us to understand perspectives shared by collaborators and to integrate the information typically presented in the CLR in ways that honor those perspectives. The first is Awadi, a compound word combining Hidatsa terms for earth, awa, and lodge, adi. To borrow Mike's words, the term Awadi transcends the simple definition of an earthen dwelling. Earth lodges are the centralmost points in our lives. Buffalo Bird Woman, whose accounts were documented by ethnographer Gilbert Wilson, describes the lodges as the center of the universe. He later goes on to say that the earth lodge is not a structure of dead willows, cottonwoods, grasses, and dirt. The earth lodge is living and has a spirit of its own. If we think of the earth lodge as the center of the universe, then Adjigada helps us to understand the periphery that surrounds that center. Adjigada describes a communal sense of belonging. Again, borrowing Mike's words, wrapped within the simplified term of Adjigada is the imparted idea of the continual transference of knowledge from elders to little ones, the passing of sacred cultural knowledge from older practitioners to young apprentices, a warm and welcoming kinship structure. He later writes that with a solid foundation and understanding of this belonging and existence, they, being Hidatsa and Mandan people, were equipped with everything they needed from the interior lodge, and they came to be shaped and reshape the world around them. Having heard these definitions, it might be a little easier to grasp the immensity of what these Earth Lodge village landscapes involve and represent to descendant communities. An entire universe, a complete way of being, whole codes of behavior, respect, and responsibility were developed in complete integration with this specific landscape. I know it's a lot of words, and I'm sorry for that in the slide. But what I'm trying to convey is that the existing National Historic Landmark and National Register of Historic Places significance is based on designations that were prepared by archaeologists in the 1960s to the 1980s. These early forms centered determinations of significance around European and Euro-American experience of the landscape and/or determined value based solely on archaeological integrity. In 1964, Hidatsa Village, which is the current NHL, was recorded as an excellent example of the effects of nearly 100 years of the fur trade contact and the acculturation resulting from it. So, by the late 1980s, while there is some mention of Hidatsa and Mandan culture and the history of the site, you can see that the areas of significance were still split between archaeological periods and explorations and settlement by prominent Europeans and Euro-Americans. Finally, by 2013, the Knife River Indian Villages National Historic Site Foundation document included a significance statement for the period associated with Northern Great Plains agrarian communities on the Knife and the Missouri Rivers. One of the main goals of this document, Cultural Landscape Report, is to set the stage for a revised National Historic Landmark nomination and a potential traditional cultural place designation that reflects the significance of the landscape to members of the 3 affiliated tribes, whose ancestors built a thriving culture based in this landscape long before European or Euro-American visitors arrived. And that significance is not simply based on past events or archaeology, but is reaffirmed through storytelling and activities in the landscape. While we don't have time to recount the entire history of the landscape at Knife River, I do want to share some of the most important historic periods for the landscape and the tools we used to express landscape change and interaction based on collaboration with tribal advisors. So some of the themes we understand to be critical to Hidatsa and Mandan worldviews include this idea of centers and peripheries, cycles, movement, conceptualizations of time, reflection, and observation. These themes are often layered in a single activity, concept, or story. Though we know that humans engaged the landscape long before this time, the period between 1100 and 1781 represents a time when the ancestors of today's Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people were living in the Missouri River Valley and developing a rich agricultural economy and cultural complex. Some important elements of the cultural landscape during this time include the location of the study area landscape relative to the Knife and Missouri rivers. This was really important to the history and development of the villages because the Missouri River was a primary transportation corridor through the region. It was the center of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara economies, but also an important cultural figure. In Hidatsa tradition, the earth is grandmother and the Missouri River is grandfather. Together, those two entities shaped the terraced riparian landscape, the river bottomlands that MHA peoples called home. In the words of tribal member Taylor Sam Driver, it holds our stories, traditions, and that connection with the plant life in the water. Because all the water has a spirit. Every tributary of water around us has a spirit. And that's just how the Mandan and Hidatsa were. Because everything has a spirit, you treated everything with respect. One tool we developed in collaboration with tribal advisors was a seasonal rounds diagram. So this diagram illustrates seasonal and lunar timing related to agricultural activities, harvesting wild foods, and cultural activities such as storytelling and singing in a historic Earth Lodge village. It is a generalization that showcases the cyclical nature of agricultural activities in the village landscape and the keen observation of the environment that Mandan and Hidatsa people used to shape and be shaped by their surroundings at Knife River and beyond. Lunar cycles, plant cycles, storytelling cycles all fit within the depiction of an annual agricultural activities. It reaffirms our understanding of the movement inherent in traditional lifeways between winter villages and summer villages, and between other places in the territory visited for hunting, ceremonial purposes, or foraging. Finally, the seasonal rounds diagram decouples history from the linear timeline. Part of the richness of the culture in traditional Earth Lodge villages rested in the integration of cultural and environmental cycles and the layering of these cycles through time. A more traditional graphic typology used in CLRs is the period of landscape change diagram. As we generated these diagrams to document what we understood about the physical landscape throughout history, what emerged as an awareness that what is significant about the study area landscape goes so far beyond a collection of archaeological sites. It's the terraced topography generated by the rivers over time and the soils and vegetation that change in response to those conditions. It's the vast area we know is under cultivation to support these thriving villages and their trade economies. And it was the rivers themselves as cultural figures, transportation routes, and the breadth of ecological services they provided the villages. The end of this historic period is marked by the first major smallpox epidemic that swept through the villages in 1781. The cultures and economies of the Mandan and Hidatsa tribes suffered losses not only of family and community members, but of the knowledge that these people held. 1782 marks the beginning of the Five Villages or Knife River period, during which the surviving Mandan and Hidatsa peoples came together to rebuild their communities and defend from common enemies in the wake of the epidemic. During this period, the Mandan established 2 villages just south of the 3 Hidatsa villages within the study area, and their close relationship led to the name Awadegehu, or the 5 Villages. And despite this time coming on the heels of unimaginable sadness and suffering, it is one that many of our collaborators speak of with great pride. There was a movement from the larger complex back to Knife River as a kind of epicenter, a focusing of culture that yielded a period of time that's viewed with great nostalgia. New kinship lines were drawn to ensure that everyone felt a sense of belonging. This concept of Adi Buddha, regenerating culture, and keeping traditions alive was prominent during this period. As they were still known for their established trading position and network, the Knife River period saw many visits from European and Euro-American visitors, whose documented impressions and accounts formed the basis for many of the existing significant statements. While this was often framed as a point of beginning, where Mandan and Hidatsa cultures changed in response to interactions with Euro-American visitors, our expanded understanding includes an awareness of the established richness of Mandan and Hidatsa cultures, their shrewd trading practices, and their genuine curiosity and interest in learning about the skills and technologies of other people. One thing that Mike and another collaborator, Gerard Baker, like to remind us of is that these ancestors, the people who lived in these villages, were humans just like us. It's important to remember their humanity in our accounts of this history. It's one of the reasons we incorporated as much direct language as we could into the report. It's a tool we can use within the framework of a CLR to foreground the human aspect of cultural landscapes. During this period, we see some important consistencies and evolutions in the village cultural landscape. They are still based on the terrace topography and tied to the hydrologic cycles of the Knife and Missouri rivers. The widespread use of horses for transportation resulted in travois trails that indicate common routes of entry and exit from the villages. Our understanding of important cultural sites in this area is broadened by Toomey's map. The map illustrates a different style of place knowing and map making, and is drawn more as one would move through and experience the landscape rather than from an aerial perspective. In 1834, another smallpox epidemic devastated the 5 villages. In combination with depleted timber resources and aggression from enemies, this roughly marks the end of regular habitation of the 3 villages by Mandan and Hidatsa peoples. By around 1845, after a period of wandering, surviving Mandan and Hidatsa people settled at Lake-Afishnook village, north of the study area, and were joined in the 1860s by surviving Arikara people, marking the first time that the 3 tribes settled together. During this time, they again redrew kinship lines, forged new economies, and kept many traditions alive. In the interest of time, and because we were focused specifically on the landscape at Knife River, I'm not going to go into great detail about the history after 1845. However, it is important to make note of a couple dates and patterns that relate directly to the condition of the landscape that we see today at Knife River Indian Village's National Historic Site. And they are the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and a series of agreements drafted by the United States government throughout the 1860s and 1870s, which resulted in the reduction of lands owned and managed by 3 affiliated tribes at what would become the Fort Berthold Reservation, and the simultaneous arrival of Euro-American squatters settling on land they intended to homestead. Settler agricultural practices, including plowing, resulted in the erasure of some surface features associated with the villages. Beginning in the 1880s and 90s, tribal members were separated onto 160-acre allotments, which destroyed the close communal way of life, integral to many of their cultural practices, including agriculture, and led to the abandonment of Lake-Afishnook village. They were also subjected to the boarding school system, which caused generational trauma and damaged the passage of knowledge from older to younger generations. At the Knife River Indian villages, plowing and the construction of roads and buildings severely impacted the remains of the village landscapes, as shown in the upper photo of Hidatsa village overlaid by the Grannis Olds homestead from the 1930s. In 1953, the Garrison Dam was completed as part of the Pick Sloan project, and the inundation of the river bottom lands submerged numerous cultural sites, including Lake-Afishnook village, towns such as Elbow Woods, and a whole ecosystem typology, the river bottom lands, with which Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara lifeways are intertwined. Recognized for its archaeological potential in the 1960s, the Knife River Indian Village's National Historic Site was established in 1974 and expanded in the early 1990s. The current study area extends. The first visitor center was located in the Grannis Olds homestead pictured here, which now houses the maintenance complex. So many actions were taken against these communities that threaten their survival as well as their abilities to live their traditions as Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people. To many of our collaborators, the landscape at Knife River represents one of the only places they can visit where their ancestors lived fully in their traditional ways. In a culture based on cycles and reflection and oral tradition, where the Awadi are living beings, and the landscape is imbued with spirits, being in the village cultural landscape is being amongst family, amongst fullness of life. In our analysis and proposed treatment of the physical cultural landscape, we attempted to capture this perspective so that it can shape the future of this place. In our work documenting and analyzing cultural landscapes, we use the concept of landscape characteristics to help decipher the critical elements of the landscape and record their condition and integrity. In these photos of the landscape existing condition, we touch on many landscape characteristics that are described in detail in the report, including buildings and structures as elements of cultural landscapes, circulation routes, the organization of three-dimensional space, views and vistas, archaeological sites, topography, and vegetation, to name a few. The Earth Lodge villages are currently denoted by regular mowing. While this showcases the topographic changes around the depressions, as a practice it also increases erosion and the colonization of the village's sites by invasive vegetation. You can see in both photos the orange-tinted vegetation is mown Russian thistle. The villages are surrounded by prairie, grasslands, and patches of forests and shrubland, and are accessed by pedestrian trails maintained by the National Park Service. You can see in this photo on the right that the maintenance complex occupying the Granis Olds homestead site is highly visible from and within Hidatsa village. In undertaking our cultural landscape analysis, we're really trying to flesh out our understanding of what the key components of a summer village landscape were. For this, we relied heavily on an earlier ethnographic study of Knife River and amended the list with information we gathered from collaborators and oral histories. Using this list, we went through the process of documenting contributing, non-contributing, and missing features as they relate to both the existing significant statements included in the NHL nomination and the Parks Foundation document, as well as how they relate to this more holistic understanding of what made Summer Village. Even though the iconic Earth Lodge structures are no longer present in the landscape, the depressions that are extant allow us to understand the scale of these lodges, their layout within the village, and their relationship to the surrounding landscape. Because we were able to visit the site with collaborators and speak with tribal members about their experience of being in the landscape, we know that this place is very much still alive. Not only is this an important place of origin, as Calvin Grinnell mentioned, but because of inundation, this is one of the only places tribal members can visit to experience the sense of layered cyclical time where their ancestors and traditional lifeways are present and embedded in the landscape. I'll now hand it off to my colleague Brenda Williams to talk a little bit more about treatment.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. Hi, thank you all so much for coming today to hear from us about this work and things that we have learned. My name is Brenda Williams, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin, which is the home of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. And the work that I do, a lot of it is informed by people from the Ho-Chunk Nation who have helped me learn about how to learn from Indigenous people about our places and landscapes. So I'm a landscape architect, and I specialize in cultural landscapes. And I am so pleased to be here today to talk to you about this project that we've done in collaboration with Mike and the National Park Service. So one of the things, so Kate has just talked to you about what in the world of cultural landscape reports we call part one. And part one is what I call the foundation or the structure that gives us an understanding of a place from which then we can build recommendations for the future. So we have to have this grounding and understanding before we can start to make decisions about what should happen in the future. So, as we move into part two, which we call treatment, this is a time when we think about, are there things about this place that, that we need to take care of in a very special way, or that possibly we need to make some changes in order to help this place better either speak for itself or help people understand it. So the first thing we did to develop that sort of beginning of part two and treatment is we came together. I can't believe it's been almost 2 years ago, but it was in October 2022 that we all came together and had a series of workshops, and many of you were there, but brought together people from a lot of different organizations, members of MHA, members, and people from all kinds of people, and we talked about what would be a vision for the future of the landscape here. And so I wanted to share that vision before we move into talking about how we kind of built that out. But really importantly, that this is a place where we need to preserve both the cultural and the archaeological landscape, and also rehabilitate selected aspects to support cultural connections for MHA peoples and to improve the legibility of the landscape significance out there in the physical place. So it was really from hearing from tribal members about their hopes for the future of Knife River that was a really critical part of guiding the treatment. This occurred through oral history interviews that Mike conducted with elders and knowledge holders. We also heard from MHA youth and other community members about what is important to them and ideas for how to help them feel more connected to this place. So I'm going to share a brief video clip to give you an example of what we heard from youth who came and joined us at that workshop.
It's nice to see that our culture is still being kept alive, and yeah, I would like to see more of that for sure.
I think having like days where there's more storytellings in the future, or where like Linda was talking about how there's a day where we can all come here and like almost harvest plants, or having like harvest days, or days where we can learn about the plants and learn about their uses and make foods with them. Like the box elder tree, how we made syrup out of that. She was talking about doing that again, and I think that would be good because that's something that we've lost, and I don't hear about it a lot. I learned that from a book, actually. I think it would be good to have things that would bring people in like that, or having gardening and then having like harvest days, or having days where people can come and pull weeds, or have days where they can remound the garden and just help whenever they can. I think that would be good for a community because this is really, it's closer to Bismarck than it is to us, I think. So, and a lot of our people live in Bismarck too, so I feel like it would be a good way to include them.
Yeah, kind of like the halfway point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like today, going around with Linda showing us all these different, herbs and plants and such. It was really comforting to know that you don't necessarily have to go to the pharmacy. There's like remedies all around you. You just have to research and go out there and find it. So that was really nice. I like that a lot. And I think it would be cool to come back here, like we said, and explore that more and like be able to harvest some of that, and maybe even learn, like even like have a demonstration on how to use it, what it tastes like, stuff like that. More lodges, because you see a lot of teepees. And when I like go travel and I visit my friends back in Idaho, they're like, so do you live in a teepee? And I'm like, my people lived in earth lodges. I was like, we didn't live in teepees. And no, I don't live in an earth lodge or a teepee. I live in a house. So it's nice to get around and learn everything. And I definitely want to bring, like my niece and my nephews here, get them educated, show them, kind of encourage them a bit about our culture too. And it's how we survive.
For me, it's still the mounds. Just kind of like imagining what it would have been like back then.
Yeah, that's true, because they're all kind of in close proximity too. So it's kind of like you almost got to see like the spirits of what it was like before.
Yeah. It's also kind of like a sense of reconnecting and being there where your ancestors used to be, and being able to kind of be where they were and almost be with them.
So really, you can see, listening to community members about the value to them of activities on site that can incorporate learning about traditional practices, plants, and stories in this location directly influence the treatment recommendations in the Cultural Landscape Report. Mike's going to talk more about the generous sharing that the community members did to help us learn in just a few minutes. But first, I want to talk a little bit about some of that treatment. Oops, I can do this. So Kate explained that the Cultural Landscape Report is focused on the entire National Historic Site landscape at a broad scale, and there are two areas where recommendations are more detailed, north and south, and you see those outlined in the white dashed lines here. So, so the overall study area, the north detail area, and the south detail area are how the recommendations are organized, and they're also grouped by landscape characteristics, like Kate explained to you what we do, like how we use those when we think about cultural landscapes, and also experience associated topics that are listed here. So today I'm really doing a very fast overview of selected treatments. After the presentation, we're going to be here for a while and we can absolutely answer questions you might have. There are also, as Alicia mentioned, and again, the sign-in sheets, please give us your email address if you're interested. There will be a story map online that will have a lot of this information in it, as well as more of these videos of, that were taken out on site while we were doing the workshop with people who are from the tribes. And so there will be access to that information soon. Some of the plan focuses directly on the physical landscape. For instance, the topography of the Earth Lodge villages, the floodplain of the Knife and Missouri rivers, and the topographic terraces offered opportunities for Hidatsa and Mandan peoples to create the villages here. Preservation of these aspects of the landscape include erosion repair and long-term monitoring to ensure that the landscape is not, that there are not things being washed away with time. Other recommendations include building relationships and pathways for collaboration, or actually maybe extending them, because I think they're being built and they were started some time ago. Particularly between the National Park Service and the MHA Nation, and recommendations related to tribal use of the landscape include working with tribal educators and representatives to develop a management agreement between the two organizations, coordinating with the MHA Nation to determine physical and programmatic needs to welcome MHA visitors to the site, and establishing programming to support increased engagement by members of the three affiliated tribes. The focus in the landscape is expanded beyond the areas of the Earth Lodge depressions through circulation by connecting between historic trail routes, the river, and surrounding landforms. Adding a trail adjacent to the historic trail route that connected the villages and beyond will help visitors understand that each village was part of a larger community and will create opportunities for walking between the villages and interacting with the plants, topography, views of the river, the feel and the sound of the wind, which is really an important part of that landscape, and also other dynamic aspects of the landscape. Broad-scale vegetation is focused on supporting native plant communities, including prairie, shrubland, cottonwood and willow forest, ashwoods, and floodplain and riparian areas. Also, a pollinator corridor of native plants is established along the highway in a strip that the National Park Service owns that mostly includes non-native plants right now. And a native plant nursery is created to propagate plants for use throughout the park. So in the south area, between the Earth Lodge and the villages, the garden and demonstration areas are expanded and plants and other features with cultural uses can be added to create interesting cultural cues along the trail. The Russian thistle, which is a non-native plant at the village sites, is replaced with native buffalo grass to reduce erosion, to improve resilience to environmental conditions, and to improve cultural relevance and legibility of those village locations. An example of activities between the Earth Lodge and villages is members of the 3 affiliated tribes coming to Knife River to plant a traditional garden close to the replica Earth Lodge, strengthening Adiguda and passing on knowledge and traditions from across generations. And you can see this is something that's already happening out there. In the north area, the maintenance complex is relocated away from Hidatsa village to restore native plants and remove distractions from the village and associated landscape context. Prairie, shrubs, and woods are enhanced with native plants and used to help improve resilience and legibility, again, of the village and the surrounding topography and remnants of travois trails. A trail leads to a significant view that overlooks the village and the associated landscape. And this is a site where you can see like where the little star is and the 2 yellow lines. It's a site kind of in between and near some of the travois trails. And as you look down to the south from that, you can see up on the upper right, there's a really powerful sense of the sort of concentric rings and layers of the landscape that radiate out from that village site. So it's a place where I think a lot of people, even if they don't get to spend a lot of time in the landscape, that they can really get that sense of it's much broader than this small place where the Earth Lodge depressions are. So that was a super quick overview of just a few of the recommendations. And now Mike's going to talk to you about the most interesting pieces and share with you some of his thoughts about the importance of this landscape.
Douche, Ahtakara Hara, Malpitzikits, Theosikits, Beats, Zesha, Ikubari, Rishheads, Mapukovika, Hiratits, Mahush, Abitiguish heads, Mary Elizabeth Baker sheds, Maud Dushki, the Karishti sheds, Michael Bartholomew Sr. It's a really good day today. I'm happy to be here with all of you. It's good to see so many people in attendance. My name is Mike Bartholomew, and I'm a Mandan and a Hidatsa. I'm a member of the Locap clan. I'm a child of the Prairie Chicken. And I should mention, I do have a little sprinkling of Arikara, mostly Mandan and Hidatsa. And on my father's side, I'm a Tongva. When I first got involved with this project, it really was because my older brother, Gerard Baker, he called me up and he said, Mazook, he said, they're working on this project on Awatikithu, on the 5 villages, he said, and you're gonna be on that project. And that's my older brother, so I wasn't one to argue. I said, oh, I said, all right, I'll be part of this project. And I remember our first initial meetings, I was trying to figure out what my duties were as part of this project, what I was tasked with. And right away, Gerard interjected in this meeting, and Gerard said, he kind of posed the question to all of the collaborators in the project and National Park Service, and he said, well, what do we get? He said, as a community, he said, as a group of, Mandan and Hiradza people, he said, what are we gonna get out of this? Right? What is the end result? What is the product of this work? And so then we started kind of reframing, our positionality on what the end document would be and how it would enrich us as a community, and also kind of reoriented my understanding, because I was so hyper-focused on, doing my job correctly and what duties I would have, and reorienting myself around how will this benefit the community. And I tried to do my due diligence in approaching the oral history collection portion of the project and thinking how this would enrich us. And of course, in its very nature, oral history collection is incredibly important for Indigenous communities, being able to record the voices of elders within given communities and getting their perspectives. And a big part of my task with this project was getting the team from Quinn Evans, from National Park Service, to really reorient their understanding around Knife River. And the first thing that we had to remedy was thinking outside the park boundaries, because approaching the project initially, it was like, okay, this is Knife River Indian Villages. And it was coming back to this idea and saying, well, no, this is, Awadikilhu is a much larger complex. And we have to understand movement through space. We have to understand the way our people traverse this area. And so this was part of my task with the oral history collection, was talking about space, talking about movement. And I recall sitting with Harry Sitting Bear, who was just instrumental to understanding this project and talking about movement through space. And right away he orated this story about our people, the Hiradza, going on this expedition to fight our enemies at the Snake River. And it's in Idaho, and it's really something that broke down these kind of ideas about, well, this is our space, right? And this is how we traverse our space. And understanding that everything we do as Indigenous researchers, it's always revisionist. We always have to come back to the ethnographic record, we have to come back to the archaeological record, geography, the history, and we have to meet it with contestation. Because as we know as Indigenous people, oftentimes anthropologists came into our communities, they recorded it, but they didn't get things right. And they didn't get things right because you have to understand all of the facets of a given community, all of the elements that are at play in order to understand why Indigenous actors within a given time period do what they do, right? And so we had to do everything from the ground up and kind of reconceptualize everything, or reconceptualize our concepts of time. And it was really illuminating through this project to get reacquainted with this space that I think in large part for the larger community here at Fort Berthold, we have become disconnected from. But there's an embedded historical reason as to why we've become disconnected. Because if we look at the generations before us, right, especially in the post-dam period, the post-garrison period, our people are trying to survive, right? We're trying to pull ourselves up out of these low points within our given histories, and we're trying to survive. And so we have been living in that state of survivance since that post-1837 smallpox epidemic period. And we have such a wonderful opportunity now in our present age, in our contemporary time, that we can revisit these historical episodes and we can interject our narratives, our perspectives, our understandings. And that's why, in large part, within this presentation, we were looking at some of these concepts, right? You have to redefine the family. You have to redefine the lodge grouping. And you have to understand the swirling plethora of centers and peripheries, right? And all of these things, these elements that interconnect with one another. In order to understand landscape, you have to understand how Indigenous people conceptualize landscape. How do they think about everything imbued with spirits, right? That's gonna really change the way that you behave within your given environment. This understanding of ecological balance. And this was something that we had to keep in mind when we were looking at the history of the park, right? The history of the Knife River Indian villages. And we look at the occupation period of Awadikilhu, those 5 villages, and it's a really short-lived period. It's 53 years. It's in the post-period of the 1781 smallpox epidemic to, again, the next epidemic in 1837. But Knife River is incredibly important because, what is it? It's for the first time in their collective histories that all of the subgroups of the Hiradza, all of the remaining subgroups of the Mandan, come and they live in close proximity to each other out of mutual defense, but also because they're holding that portion of the river, right? And they come to redefine themselves. And in order to understand Awa Tigitlu, we have to understand the smallpox epidemic in 1781. The Mandan have to retreat from their heartland at the Heart River Complex, move in close proximity to Hiradza. And what do they do in this post-epidemic period? It's something really incredible. They become really galvanized in their faith. There's young practitioners, right? People become essentially part of this like religious fervor. Everybody is participating in the Okipa among the Mandan, the Nakpike among the Hiradza, and it's a point at which they redraw kinship lines and they reorient themselves in their world. And I think there's something incredibly important about that, and there's a lot that comes out of this historical episode that we can latch onto, that we can take strength from. And moving through the oral history collection, I had to be corrected in many ways because I was thinking about the wrong questions. And I think the wrong questions were something that had arose from a lot of researchers that come into Indigenous communities. For example, we really hold to high esteem this 1851 Laramie Treaty. But if we look at the 1851 Laramie Treaty and we think about what is being discussed within the parameters of that treaty negotiation, this is the largest gathering of Northern Plains tribes, and from the vantage point of the US Army and the cartographers, they want to set about bounded space, right? They want to create territory, they want to create boundaries. Well, as Indigenous people, as Mandan, as Hiradza people, we don't have bounded space, right? We don't have these like simplistic notions of territory. You can't draw lines on a map. A lot of it is abstraction, right? A lot of it is symbolic. So during that whole meeting of this treaty negotiation, tribes are expressing who they are within that given negotiation. And these army cartographers are asking their territories, and what they're getting in response is these projections of who they are, where they see themselves within a given landscape, and what you get are these kind of arbitrary lines on a map. And if you want to get my Grandma Tanya Sand like really worked up, you talk about the Laramie Treaty of 1851, because it's not really a true representation of that earlier territory, right? And Hiradza people understood this, Mandan people understood this, but we also have to understand this Western cartographic tradition is something incredibly new. And so all of these things we had to revisit, and in the course of this oral history collection, there was so much that was really kind of brought to the surface. Here's me with Harry Sitting Bear. Oh, and this is my little guy, Yamu, who's just kind of brand new then. But these were the oral histories that were collected. Gerard Baker, Calvin Grinnell, Harry Sitting Bear, Mary Gauchapin, Tanya Sandriver, Nellie Boyd, Kevin Finley, and Eric Holland. And each one of these individuals lent something different to this perspective. Gerard really talked about the creation of Knife River as a park entity and what went into that effort, but then also early conversations that he had within this period with tribal elders. And there was really kind of this embedded and inherent fear about Awa Tigitlu because of what had happened there, because the collapse had happened, right, 1837. So Gerard was constantly told by tribal elders in that time, when he was in his 20s, like, don't touch anything, don't bring anything back. Because if you bring something up here, you're gonna bring sickness, right? You'll bring smallpox. And so there were tribal elders that had kind of this open aversion to going back to this place with this openly set fear. And that really speaks to the strength of that oral history tradition, right? Of what had happened in that place. But Gerard also talked about, also about movement through space, but then kind of reorienting our understanding about the importance of this site. And then Calvin Grinnell talked about, being a byproduct of this post-Garrison period, and how in many ways, right, they had heard from their folks, they heard from their grandparents, all about the bottomlands. And we have to think about this kind of regenerated nostalgia. And we all kind of carry this regenerated nostalgia with us. My mother, she talks about her upbringing at the log home on Mandaree, and she talks about her folks, and she talks about, life was just idyllic, right, growing up there. And she talks about, with her and Paige and Gerard and growing up on the ranch out there. And I remember I was fortunate enough to be in a household with my grandma Cora, and my grandma Cora Youngberg, she talked about her kind of nostalgic era, and it was Lucky Mountain, right? It was there on the bottomlands with her mother Susie Walker and her father Joe Youngberg, and she talked about her folks. and they had talked about Khushka Awadish. They talked about that Khushka village up in Williston area. And she talked about her grandmother, Marikabesh, and Marikabesh had talked about this place, Awadikikhu, right, the 5 villages. So we carry on this like nostalgic understanding of these earlier periods, but there's a tricky thing with nostalgia, because we have to understand, just as was reiterated by Brenda and by Kate, when we place these periods on a pedestal, we kind of remove the humanness, the human element. And we have to understand that Awadikikhu is something more, right? It's a place that was occupied by people, right? People fell in love there, people made jokes there, right? There's living, breathing people like within these villages. And so that was, again, this kind of reorientation around the existing 5 villages as it was. But Calvin Grinnell, talking about this, nostalgic element for this bottomland community, something that had been lost. He said that this kind of rediscovery of Awadikikhu led a lot of the younger people when he was in his 20s, right, to visit with this place. And also there was a safe entity that was at Knife River, Gerard Baker. And I also had to check my privilege within this project, knowing that growing up, we always talked about Awadikikhu. And we talked about it because Gerard had worked there. We talked about it because it was just one of those like conversations, right? It was something that was like well known, and it was also, showcased through the project. The reason why I picked the people that I interviewed, because they had this kind of like direct connection, this direct knowledge. It was really interesting interviewing my grandma Mary, because initially I asked my grandma, I said, Magu, I said, can I interview you about Awadikikhu? And at first it was kind of hesitancy, and it was like, well, I don't really know about Awadikikhu. And until we finally sat down and I asked her, I said, Magu, I said, did you ever hear about Knife River? Did you ever hear about Awadikikhu, those 5 villages? And she said, yeah, my dad, John Yellowwolf, talked about it all the time. And so then again, it was, revealed that it was something that was talked about within the household, but also like showcasing like this knowledge comes from elsewhere, right? This is also showcasing, again, this transference of knowledge from elders to little ones. And so all of these individuals really went to this project, and they all brought something different. Tanya Sand-Driver, very much, was kind of our ethnobotanical expert. And at the time that I was interviewing my grandma Tanya, I remember bringing her into the MHA Tribal Park space over there in the Badlands, and us going around and her identifying all the plant life. And, we were working on an ethnobotanical field guide at the time, and I remember asking my grandma, I said, Magu, I said, can I eat this? No, you can't eat that. What about this one? Can I eat that one? Because I was really, playing my role as grandson. And it was really kind of crazy. But her also identifying within the given landscape, like these are all invasive species, right? A lot of these are invasive species. And this landscape wouldn't have looked this way 150 years ago. So then we had another task, at hand, like thinking about the landscape, we look at it, but then coming to this new realization that from an ethnobotanical standpoint, we have a lot of invasive species and the landscape has changed. And then Nellie Boyd, having the opportunity to have that interview with her and talking about early park interpretation and talking about interpretation during the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial. And I asked her about source base. I asked her what was used for interpretation, and she said, well, we used the ethnographies, right? We used what was available to us, which was the ethnographic studies, was the archaeology. And so again, right, we're meeting these documents in contestation, but usually what happens with indigenous communities is there's always kind of this pendulum swing, right, with regard to this archaeological or ethnographic information. Tribal members will either embrace the ethnographic report as though it was gospel, or they'll have the other pendulum extreme and they'll completely dismiss it. And what we have to do is we have to look at these documents through a critical lens. And we have to understand the nature of that document, how it was written, when it was written, in order for us to really illuminate what's happening in a given study. Gilbert Wilson, for example, right, he does some really phenomenal ethnographic studies, but he's also a preacher, right? So when he's approaching some of our cultural figures, he looks at Wadzere Duadza, he looks at Itzig Wahiresh, and he goes, oh, this must be Jesus, and this one must be the devil, right? And then, placing his worldview, his cultural worldview. And this is a really wonderful opportunity for us in that we get to interject our worldview as indigenous people, and that's why it was just, I was so fortunate to be able to interview these individuals. And Kevin Finley, as a descendant of the Goodbird family, and talking about, these ethnographic studies, and talking about how transference of knowledge had worked within his family and those perspectives was incredibly illuminating, right, for us in a revisitation of the ethnographic material. And I think one of the things that really stuck with me in his interview is, in asking him about Awadikehu and asking him about 5 villages, his open response was, well, I'd love to learn more. And I think he's showcasing something that a lot of us have within our given communities. We want to learn more about these places. We want to become reacquainted because it's been a long time since 1837, right? And a lot has happened since then. Because another thing that was posed by the National Park Service is they were asking me, well, why don't your people come back, right? Why don't they go to this place? And it's like, well, there's a lot of things that have happened to us in the given time from 1837. And so you have to understand all of these historical episodes in order to understand a seemingly simplistic question of like, why don't your people return to this place? But I think we have ample opportunity to return to our places, to become reacquainted with them. Eric Holland is the one non-tribal member, and Eric Holland had done this really wonderful oral history collection, this Knife River collection with elders in the 1990s. And he had come into the community here at Fort Berthold, and he had done all of these interviews as it related to their new opening and interpretive center at Knife River. And so he was one that I really wanted to interview and talk to him about the nature of those recordings and how he had come to conduct that project. But all of these oral histories have come to inform this document, have come to inform our history, our reorientation of that history. And the thing that always gives me hope in these types of projects is the young people, right? We have a lot of young people working on these projects, and we have to think about those generations before us, those ones that have gone before us, and they broke barriers for us. They provided opportunities for us. They walked those hard roads so we could run. So I say, as young people, let's run. Like, we have this incredible opportunity afforded to us. Like, we can interject our own narratives. We can, become more acquainted with our spaces. And so this is why this document is so incredibly important, and this work is so incredibly important. Us getting reacquainted with something like Knife River, because the Knife River Indian villages, it's a lesson, right? You look at, in the aftermath of 1781 smallpox epidemic, and everybody came together, right? These different autonomous groups came in close proximity to one another, and you see what is essentially cultural apex, right? 1837, or 1834 rather, Carl Bodmer is, showcasing this imagery of the villages. And when I worked here at the Interpretive Center, and I was the archivist and I was the historiographer on staff, I wrote the interpretive panels for the Interior Lodge. And the Interior Lodge is this depiction by Carl Bodmer, and it's almost as if you're like peeking into somebody's lodge. And it's so phenomenal because it's just everyday life. But there's something there, there's something that is evoked like within us. There's an emotion that comes up when we see it as tribal people. It's actually up on the wall, just like right back there. And it's peering into that lodge. It's the lodge of Broken Lake. It's the Mandan Lodge, in which all visitors would come to and they would be hosted. But when you see the Interior Lodge, there's something that speaks volumes to you, and it's normalcy, right? And as tribal people, that's what we long for. We long for that normalcy, because since 1837, we have lived in survivance. And now we can get back to a point of normalcy. But all of these elements at play are incredibly important. But Maatsigara Tikitiwa, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today. I really appreciate it and listening. But that's all I have. So go ahead.
Just a moment.
Hi. I wasn't really ready to say anything, but I'll try to fumble through. We are lucky, we're blessed and lucky, and Mike made a really strong statement when he said that it's a new time because our tribe has, we're acquiring land outside the boundaries of our reservation. We're getting those in trust, and then they're becoming within our boundaries of our reservation. So our reservation has grown for the first time in 120 years. We've included the Figure 4 ranch is now within our boundaries, and we purchased the Fedic ranch, the Fedic property right on the south side of the river in the Little Missouri River, and that's in trust, and we're waiting for the proclamation, and as soon as they proclaim it, the sign that says "Welcome to Fort Berthold" will move from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill. So when you come, when you come off. Anyway, so we were lucky. The other thing is when they bought that, when they bought that, they said that the tribal, our council said that we could make it into a park. And they're talking about conservation and preservation. And so it's our task now to start working on how that looks. And we talked to the Army Corps. We have good partners. The National Park Service is helping us, Rivers Trails and Conservation Service. And they've been with us for 2 years, and we're hoping that they stay with us another year. The Army Corps of Engineers has the bottom below the park, the river bottom. We'll get those leases. We'll come back to the park, and so we'll have that. And there's some camping areas and stuff that the Corps is giving back to the tribe. So we're getting our bottomlands back by the river. So we'll be able to have those. They'll connect us to the Figure 4. It's been a long process, and we're very new, very fumbling through. And when I first took this project on, they said, "Oh, that'll be fun." And then I thought, holy smokers, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. But I was lucky. I had Gerard and Paige, and they got Rivers Trails and Conservation Service involved with us. And then I've had good help. Mike helped along the way, Ethan, Vaughn, and Taylor. We have good help, and we're just moving ahead. And so we have a park. MHA has a park now, a tribal national park, and at some point, or tribal park, and at some point we'll get a name for it, because you know what? Names are important, and you can't just guess anything. You gotta wait till it names itself. So till it names itself, it's MHA Park, and at some point we'll find a name. Anyway, and that we have a staff, and Ethan is the superintendent. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Ethan, and sorry I fumbled along, but thank you for listening to me.
So as she said, we're really new, we're in development, and with that being said, we could use all of your guys' help. Because we're in those early stages of development, policy writing, management policies, things like that. And we have a tribal website, Fawn, I'm gonna try not to mess it up here, the MHAtribalpark.com. And on that website, we have links to all of our social media, so please go and follow us. And we also have a park survey. And it would be really great if you guys were able to go on and fill out the survey. Tell us what kind of park you'd like to see us have. What type of recreational activities do you want to see there? Do you want to see, what type of programming and things of that nature? So it's really, it would be great if everybody could do that, because your voices are really important. That tells us what we're supposed to do. How should we move forward? And that's important. So.
One more thing.
Okay. Just really quick, I'd like to thank Knife River Indian Villages and their staff for everything that they've done, for putting together, them and their partners for putting this together. That's not an easy feat, especially to come up here and to tell tribal members about ourselves, right? That's not easy. So it's really great that you guys were able to do this, and I want to thank you. Knife River Indian Villages is a platform, and they're protecting our homelands, they're protecting part of our cultural complex, and they're helping us tell our story. So again, thank you guys.
Just real quickly, I've been in and out of here on the phone, and I was talking to Gerard Baker, and it's ironic because I was listening to Mikey and Gerard. I said something, we were laughing because we always laugh, and we were laughing about something. And I said, we're Gidishadzi, and he said, we're not Gidishadzi. He said, we're strong now. We're strong. We're not Gidishadzi anymore. And I wanted to appreciate that because Mikey's bringing that message forward, and it's time we're reinvigorated. So, okay, thank you.